I think I'll start. I don't know if Pintara is here, or maybe I should announce myself, which I can do. But I mean, we have the fifth and maybe the last or the pre-last online activity or webinar, or let's call them even a workshop in relation to our aligning project, which is focused on establishing innovative or innovation clusters at the universities in Cambodia and Bangladesh in relation to supporting agricultural production amid climate change. The previous webinars or online activities were focused each on their own field. We started with Uffe Johansen, who presented the innovative use of biomass in the context of Northern Europe and the biorefining to protein. Then I think it was Knul from the Food and Biocluster Denmark, who presented more the industrial uptake of not only the biomass value chain, but generally a lot of technologies which some people believe they are maybe more sustainable or climate friendly. I think the next two webinars were, maybe somebody can remind me, one was from our colleague in Greece in relation to the establishing of the innovation clusters. And the last one that we had just maybe 2 weeks ago was I think in relation to using digital infrastructure for knowledge dissemination, such as Moodle, and how we can design this more effectively, these courses. So I think all of the previous webinars were quite relevant for the project, and I hope many lessons have been learned. It's quite important to put, as I always mention, things in the local context. So what is relevant in Cambodia or in Bangladesh? Now, I'll give a talk as a representative of the Department of Agroecology at Aarhus University on how can we use remote sensing as both, science, but also technology. So both for research and education to support agricultural activities, also in the context of climate change. You just give me a minute to share the presentation because I was sharing this advertisement before. And maybe somebody can confirm if you're using the right screen, because I don't trust Zoom. So does it look right from your end, maybe, Naret?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Kiril, we can see it.
Not in the presenter mode, but in the viewer mode.
Yes, I can see the screen now, and I can also see others people here.
Super, sounds good. Yes, a bit of housekeeping or organization. So the event today is scheduled. I will give some sort of either a lecture or maybe my viewpoint on the topic, and then we will make a small break. I have also prepared a link because we need for the purpose of the project, but also it's always interesting. I'm also interested who is who. That means which participant comes from which university, how did you see the event? I have prepared a small Google questionnaire on that. And then after the break, we will disseminate the questionnaire, and maybe we will spend a few minutes in relation to one small task that is actually also quite interesting, and I believe it's directly usable not only in the deliverable of this event, but also maybe we can use it later on. So if there are some questions, please keep them for after the presentation. Otherwise, I'll just spend about between 30 and 40 minutes. So the topic, new, I don't know if they are new, but we believe they are. Remote sensing tools to monitor nitrogen and water status and estimate requirements in agricultural production. This is the title. It's a bit specific, but actually I will try to keep the presentation even more general. As I mentioned, who am I? a researcher and a senior advisor at the Department of Agroecology. I am also affiliated with the Center for Agricultural Resource Research at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Otherwise, I did my PhD in water transport phenomena and nitrogen turnover in agricultural systems. I also graduated environmental engineering and a master degree in environmental remote sensing. So I am supposed, at least formally, to know a bit about remote sensing from a research and innovation perspective. Otherwise, my research focus is nitrogen, and nitrogen goes together with water. And these two elements I research in agricultural context, so crop and soil. What is the purpose? To balance the production and to minimize pollution. What we call this reactive flows, pollution, so nitrate leaching, nitrous oxide emission, and so on. I also do a lot of capacity building, system thinking, and teaching or education. Part of the tools that we are using, myself and also the team here, it's remote sensing, process-based modeling, empirical studies. From recently, I also started to do policy support. That means that's why this senior advisor position. That means in addition to research, we are here providing an advice to the Danish Ministry of Food and Environment in relation to some specific questions. And these advices have to be supported by scientific evidence. Remote sensing, it's not a new technology. It typically, big technological advances are driven by global changes, such as wars, on pandemics, you name it. In this case, it was actually war. After the World War II, suddenly the development of the remote sensing technology has been increased rapidly. So the whole story maybe started during the World War II with the innovation of the radar technology in the UK, but from a more conventional perspective, it actually started in that time USSR with the launch of the first satellite in space, and that's Sputnik 1. Ever since, it has been a drastic improvement and development in the remote sensing technologies and applications. I have taken these two literature reviews, which focus on summarizing the work involving remote sensing at a satellite scale for mapping sea surface temperatures and ocean dynamics. So a lot of focus on a global scale of this technology on the water environment, on our oceans, which are very important, especially from a climate perspective, but not much synthesis of remote sensing on the terrestrial cover. So if you're interested, let me know. We can team up and maybe try to publish a literature review on nearly half a century remote sensing in a terrestrial land cover or terrestrial vegetation. This is just an introduction, or it's a teaser for those that are interested. Just to align some expectations, I don't know, I think many of us come from a different background. So what is remote sensing in the first place? In the very general term, is an approach to measure the energy that has been taken back from a target without being in a physical contact with the target. And that is depicted on this figure, where we have a target. Here it's a small plant, and this plant is illuminated by the sun. But you can see that between the sun and the plant, there is also an atmosphere. So when this energy from the sun is being propagated until the plant, there are many processes happening in relation to transmission of the energy, absorption of the energy, scattering of the energy, and reflection. So part of this energy is reflected. And if we make a sensor or a device that is able to record this energy, we will get the information or the physical variable, which is called radiance, about how much energy has been reflected by this target. A bit of a bigger zoom here on the plant, so we can see when a sun energy hits, let's say, vegetation in this case, some part of that energy is absorbed. Vegetation needs energy for its metabolic purposes. Some part is transmitted. Some part is reflected, like a scattering, or directly reflected. Everything that is reflected, it's called radiance. It's a physical unit, radiance. It can be recorded by a sensor. Every target on this planet reflects energy, either as a reflection or a radiation. We will see it later on. But the fundamental unit in remote sensing is radiance. Radiance can be emitted until the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which is quite big. Here we can see the unit here is, let's say, nanometers. So from the gamma rays up to the radio waves. All of this energy that we are seeing here is actually emitted by different length colors. What we see with our eyes, that's also an energy which is reflected by the target, but our eyes are sensors which can detect only small part of this energy, and that's called the visible. And here is it. So this is all the combination of the colors that our eye is able to see. This visible energy is from the 400 nanometers to the about 700 nanometers energy. But we can design sensors which are able to see also in the entire spectrum, not only in this one. So one of the first interesting things to remember here is that we can see that this sensor, which is placed here, we can put it close to the sun, we can put it inside this atmosphere, or maybe we can put it very close to the canopy or to the target. That brings us to the next general explanation of remote sensing is associated with a scale. So the sensors can be at a field scale, or they can be at an airborne scale, such as the drones or the unmanned aerial vehicles. It can be a drone, it can be an airplane, it can be a helicopter. And eventually, and two are typically within the atmospheric column, if you remember the previous slide. And if we are above the atmospheric column, we have the satellites, which are far above the target. Sensors can be different in relation to the energy that they record, what I mentioned earlier. So the RGB, or this is what RGB is an abbreviation of red, green, blue. These are the basic colors that our eye is able to see. So typically the visible spectrum, which human eye can see, is called RGB. But there are sensors which can also see many other wavelengths, and they are called multispectral sensors. Sensors which are able to see thousands of wavelengths, they are called hyperspectral sensors. And all these sensors are actually recording the reflected energy. Energy can also be emitted because of the changes in the temperature. And that's another interesting point of remote sensing. Remote sensing have the energy that is recorded by remote sensing devices have two components, either reflected by the sun, but also the sun is heating the target. So some part of this energy is also emitted. And the sensors that we are using to detect this emitted energy are thermal sensors. Sensors can also be working in the ultraviolet region, which is very important for crops. So they can detect also the fluorescence. Sensors can also work more on like laser. They can also construct 3D views of the target. So they don't need to be they don't need to work in a certain part of the spectrum, but they can only take certain points in any part of the spectrum in order to construct a three-dimensional view of the target. So we have the scale and we have the sensors. In relation to the sensors, I just want to point this. This is how the curve of any plant on this planet looks if we plot the energy which is reflected in this spectrum, which is most of the cameras work on, from about 400 nanometers until 2500 nanometers. We can see that the energy is very high in the what we call the near infrared spectrum, around 1000 nanometers. It's quite low in the visible spectrum, and this is the green peak. So the green color is reflected at around 550 nanometers, and this is why we see most of the vegetation green, because plants are reflecting the green energy. They don't really use it much, but they need the red and the blue one for their metabolic processes. So that's why we don't see the plants as blue or as green, but they're absorbing this energy. And also, if we go further in the in the spectrum, we can see that the energy is declining, and this is in relation to water moisture in the air. We can see that this curve looks a bit topsy-turvy. There are some spikes, there are some reductions. I already mentioned some of the reductions in the visible spectrum are due to photosynthetic processes, but others are because of other things, such as maybe some canopy damage or disease, or there are maybe some water is absorbing energy. You know, it has a very large heat capacity as well. So a lot of these dips are happening because of water absorption. Otherwise, there are peaks which are related with other elements, such as nitrogen. The nitrogen is actually peaking in some parts of the spectrum further on. And I mentioned this because these features we can actually use in order to detect these elements. So if the nitrogen absorption is lower in this part of the spectrum, maybe I can focus on this part of the spectrum to detect nitrogen, and so on. Also here, it's denoted that most commercial cameras that we are using, you know, most of the cameras on our phone, they're such as on our phone or maybe our digital cameras, they're working in the visible band, and maybe some of them are also having a near infrared band that can provide us like more improved, enhanced images. But generally, for innovation purposes, including research, most of the cameras are working in this, what we call visible and near infrared spectrum. And that's important to bear in mind because this part of the spectrum has a limited capacity. It also shows us how visible the targets are looking, and also some limited features such as water absorption and maybe some limited nitrogen absorption. But if we want to study, let's say, plant nitrogen, we need to go further in the spectrum. But most of the cameras are not recording this spectrum, unfortunately. Why nitrogen and water are important, and in the context of remote sensing and agriculture? Don't worry, this is just estimation using the IPCC emission factors to show you that 1 kilo of nitrogen fertilizer is emitting about 4 kilos of CO2 equivalent per hectare. And if you're using a pump to irrigate water of about 100 kilowatt hours per hour, you are emitting about 100 kilos of CO2 equivalent per hectare. Of course, this depends on the pump efficiency and so on. But I just want to say that nitrogen and water are important both for production, but also from environmental perspective in relation to emission of CO2 equivalents. I don't want to say climate change, but let's call it in relation to environmental perspective. But we need water and nitrogen. This is just a depiction of how the plant grows without water and nitrogen, and this is a plant how it grows with water and nitrogen. And we can do a lot of research on how this plant is going with water and nitrogen using some traditional methods, such as field experimentation, to go on the field to take samples, to make what we call destructive sampling. But that takes a lot of time. And also the area that we can cover is quite limited. So that's why we can employ remote sensing actually to phenotype the vegetation or the plant in this case. So remote sensing for crop phenotyping. This is an interesting term. We can answer or try to answer some limited basic research questions, such as how the photosynthesis is happening in this plant and how the plant metabolism is affected by stresses in terms of tolerance and recovery, such as abiotic stresses, heat stress, drought, abiotic stresses as well, diseases, and so on. But it's not much basic basic research questions we can do when we apply remote sensing. This is because people tend to forget what I mentioned to you. Remote sensing is giving you only one variable. That's radiance. And with one variable, so much you can do. You can link it with many other variables, but it is important to remember that remote sensing is providing one variable, radiance. You can convert radiance to reflectance. On the previous slides, I showed reflectance. Reflectance is just a standardized radiance. If you divide the radiance, the actual radiance from the target, if you divide it with the radiance of a perfect reflector, typically a white target. So reflectance is a dimensionless variable from 0 to 1 fraction, or percentage from 0 to 100, how much of energy is reflected. Otherwise, the basic variable that remote sensing is recording, I told in the beginning, it's radiance. But we can do a lot of applied research questions, meaning we can combine common or traditional knowledge with remote sensing to maybe answer some questions: which variety or which crop is the most productive, how much nitrogen and water it needs, when and where. Can we target some high quality harvests of the crop? Can we reveal the agronomy of more complex agricultural systems, such as intercropping? So we have two crops, at the same time on the same place. And also maybe we can support crop protection using remote sensing. So we will see now actually how remote sensing is contributing to these applied research questions. That's the purpose of this lecture, to showcase through several studies that I myself have been involved in supporting agricultural systems from applied perspective. The first one, well, this is the only one I have not been involved, but my colleagues have been from another department. All the case studies are represented by a number in the title, and then I have tried to put here the camera that has been used, the scale, if it is on a field scale, on an airborne scale, on a satellite scale, and which variable is actually of a focus. In this first study, we can see that we have used a normal camera, RGB, the same that you use on your mobiles. The study was conducted on a field scale, and the target was to reveal the biomass production. The crop in this case was a grass-clover mixture. We can see it here with, I try to put a symbol. So grass-clover mixture, it's a combination of two crops, of a grass and of a clover. And grass and clover mixture is one of the most important economic agricultural systems in Northern Europe, because both grass and clover are, certain grasses, are very well suited to grow under cool climate and under high humidity climates, even on a sandy soils. So that means that they grow well here, and they can be used for a lot of other activities in agriculture, such as feed for animals, extraction of protein, and so on. So the motivation to focus on biomass production of grass clover is quite high. So the colleagues from Aarhus University put this camera on an interesting all-terrain vehicle. This vehicle means that it can drive through almost all terrains, but luckily in Denmark it's quite flat. Even if it needs to be driven on a more rough terrain, it can be done. And they have taken photos from the ground. As the vehicle is driving, it takes a lot of photos. And here we can see how these photos look. So throughout time, you can take photos in order to show how the canopy status is actually changing. We can see that at some point, at some part of the field, maybe there is more clover compared to other part where there is more grass, or maybe both crops are not doing well, so there is more of a ground exposed. Then the colleagues applied what we call artificial intelligence algorithms, in this case, deep learning. AL is a deep learning algorithm. I will not explain, the purpose of this lecture is not to explain the algorithms, but you're very welcome to read more. Many of these studies have already been published. But this deep learning algorithm is making a function between the information that is on these images, such as the color, the radiance or the reflectance, and between measured variables, So biomass and composition. So it is important to remember here that this algorithm needs some measured variable in order to establish a basic link. Once this link is established, then it can predict biomass and composition for any other image. Here is the establishment of the link. I have chosen this graph is quite illustrative because on the y-axis it shows the measured variable, which was the colleagues had to go outside and measure how much is clover fraction in the grass clover mixture. And then for that known area, they know also how many pixels are covered with the clover fraction. So there is a very clear relation between these two variables. And this is what this function depicts, actually. Once this function is established, as I mentioned, you can quite easily predict the proportion of fraction. Or if you use here another measured variables, such as biomass, you can predict also the biomass. Deep learning is among the most powerful classification algorithms. Unfortunately, agriculture is among the last ones to take up these algorithms. It's happening like now. I have seen it myself, and I will present another study later that we are trying to publish using deep learning algorithms. Otherwise, the origin of the deep learning algorithms is from maybe 30, 40 years ago in the medical industry and medical science. So every time when a person goes to a doctor to make a CT scan and the doctor can depict precisely, but with a very high precision on the CT scan, which cells in which area of the body are good or are bad, that's based on deep learning. And these algorithms have been developed during the, before the 90s, and they have been immediately started to be used mostly in defense industry and medical industry. This is another depiction of the same study. So how the spatial variation of the clover proportion looks on a different field. So we can see that actually the method was tested on different fields and the depiction was really, really good. As I mentioned, this study is a combination of algorithm, which is contained or integrated in the camera with an all-terrain vehicle to acquire the images, and then the efficiency is quite high. You can see that you can map hundreds of hectares of this grass clover mixture within 17 hectares per hour, and you get about 170 images per hectare. I put this information deliberately because when we talk about remote sensing and capacity building everywhere, including here, it's very important to be aware about computational capacity and also storage capacity, because remote sensing is generating data, and data needs to be stored, and storage requires space. So we need to know the algorithms, that's the computational capacity, and also the storage space. Both of these components, they become less problematic everywhere, not only in Denmark, but also in Cambodia. I'm quite sure that more and more knowledge is being generated in relation to algorithms, and more opportunities are available where people can store their data. The second study, now we didn't use normal or simple camera, but we used the multispectral camera. That means that we recorded a bit wider part of the spectrum, also on a field scale, and also the aim was to map biomass or to optimize biomass production. Now we used a different model. The previous case study was with a non-parametric. It was a machine learning model. It doesn't machine learning models or deep learning models, they don't reflect the reality, so they are not physical models. But in this case study too, we applied a physical model, and it's the Carnage-Ames-Stanford approach. It's a very long name, but maybe many of you know it as a radiation use efficiency approach. It's actually a very basic model that shows how dry matter production in plants is linked with IPAR. IPAR is how much radiation is intercepted by the canopy. what I mentioned in the first slides. The sun is radiating energy. This energy is captured by the canopy, and some part is used for photosynthesis. So this model is actually depicting exactly that. It's establishing a physical link between the dry matter production and the radiation captured by the canopy. That physical link is the radiation use efficiency. This is one of my PhD students. He actually published the study quite recently. It was also a mixture of grasses and clovers. Here is a nice drawn image. You can see that the plots, we had like 4 replicates of different treatments, so a lot of treatments. And you can see that they look a bit funky. That's because one of the treatments was the different harvest height. So some of the plots, the height of the grasses was much higher compared to the others. Also, there was the other treatment with different fertilization, and we also get different grass species. So if we use this model, using the images or the data that has been recorded on this scale, the student, here is how the IPAR is looking. So the amount of radiation which is captured by the canopy is a fraction. You can use this one to actually compile these images of intercepted radiation by the canopy and to convert it into biomes. The study have been published quite recently. Please take a look for more details. It's not that complicated. It's actually quite a straightforward procedure. What was the innovation in this study is that the student also involved how the microenvironmental conditions are affecting this function that I pointed. And these microenvironmental conditions can be diffuse radiation, so how much clouds are in the sky, temperature, it can be maximum or a mean temperature, it can be soil moisture. I mean, it can be any environmental variable that you have data for. The third study is very similar to the second one, but now, as you can see, the only difference is the scale, right? So the second study was on a field scale. Now we are testing all the scales. So a field scale, airborne scale, and satellite scale. And also, it's not only biomass, but now we want to see whether we can also detect nitrogen and manage nitrogen in the crop. The crop has also changed. So now it's not grass clover, but it's potato. Potato goes quite well in cool climates. The model is the same. So it's a physical model, which establishes a link between the radiation intercepted by the canopy and the dry matter produced. This is me during, just right after my postdoc with the PhD student. I was supervising him. We are here on a field work. So here are the potatoes. You can see, a basket full of potatoes. We applied this model and the results were actually quite good, especially in relation to nitrogen. And this is what I want to emphasize here. In relation to nitrogen, it is not enough to only predict biomass, but we still need some other function that is focused only on nitrogen. And in this case, it can be both physical or machine learning or non-physical. In this case, we also choose a physical method. It's the CNDC. It's just an abbreviation of the critical nitrogen dilution curve that establishes a link between percentage of nitrogen, here a percentage is missing, and dry matter to predict nitrogen. It's depicted on this graph here. When we couple these two models, you can see the performance was very good at all scales. This is the final result. It's just a snapshot of the remote sensing data that we got in the middle of the season at a field scale, at a drone scale, and at a satellite scale. All these squares are the different treatments, so plots. So we can see on a field scale, the resolution is the coarsest. Every plot is its own pixel. And this is how much nitrogen requirement we could predict using these two models. At the drone scale, because the spatial resolution is very high, so that means that in reality, every information on the drone image is a very narrow. It has a very small spatial detail. We can see a very nice, more like a gradual spatial variation of the nitrogen requirement. And at a satellite scale, which in this case was Sentinel-2 satellite, so the spatial resolution 20 meters, we could see the same situation just at a coarser resolution. And this is the nitrogen requirement. It's just a variable that has been calculated using these two models. And this is quite interesting because this is one very interesting way how to help the agricultural sector to decide not only how much, but also where to fertilize. It is still in experimental mode because, as you can see here, we need field data to develop these models. One of the problems with the physical models, as opposed to machine learning or to artificial intelligence models, is that physical models will always require field data in order to be confirmed or to be secured. That's not always the case with artificial intelligence models. But if you have that field data to develop the models, physical models are actually very trustful because they're based on physical principles. This case studies have been published in two studies. One of them is the CASA model for prediction of biomass. The other study is this one that I'm showing, focused on nitrogen prediction. As I mentioned, it's still in a research stage, so it's not adopted by the farming, but by the agricultural sector. There is a next study which is quite similar to the previous one. So you can see that we're hovering around similar approaches with some variations. But now, so it's also a multispectral camera. It's only on a UAV scale because now we know that the approach works on any scale. So we don't want to spend more resources. UAV, it's only because UAV is providing a very drone, what we call typically, it's providing a very high spatial resolution, and also biomass and nitrogen. But now the second model, which was focusing on nitrogen, is not a physical model, but it's an artificial intelligence model or machine learning. ML is a machine learning. That means that the machine learning model will establish a function between the measured percentage of nitrogen and the reflectance from the remote sensing technology, the image. In this case, it's vegetation index, to predict the nitrogen. And we made a data repository. That means that not only the previous study 3, was only for one point in time. Now we collected a lot of drone images. And for every image, we were able to estimate, the aim was to able to estimate crop biomass and nitrogen uptake. So these are the results for two different dates. I didn't want to overload the presentation with many dates. And again, all these squares are different treatments. So that means different plots, different cropping systems, different nitrogen, and so on, and the nitrogen requirements. It is not shown on this figure, but actually these predictions or these estimates by these two models are corresponding well with what we have observed on the field. Where you see more red, or the upper limits, are the systems which need more nitrogen. And in reality, these were the systems that were either not fertilized at all, or they were fertilized very little. So suddenly the models were able to predict high nitrogen requirement for these systems, which was very good. All the other systems which are in the lower end with the negative values, that means that not only that they don't need nitrogen, but that there is a surplus of nitrogen. So this was a very big promise. We recently submitted the paper. So we are building up around an approach that has a potential to be taken up by the agricultural services and maybe use this method. As far as they have a drone available, they have the capacity to fly the drone to obtain the images, to store the images, and they also have destructive measurements of dry matter and percentage of nitrogen. So that's important to bear in mind that these methods have some preconditions. The other case study, which also builds up to the previous ones, is a comparative study. This is more from the research end. I just wanted to show you that we are doing quite a bit of a research because there is no one algorithm which is the best. Algorithms can be suitable given their purpose. So we wanted to test a very different machine or artificial intelligence algorithms, both machine learning, such as unsupervised classification and supervised classification, but also deep learning to predict nitrogen and water status. This is the same experiment from the previous study, so potato crop. These are some of the fruit. Yeah, I know it's a lot of information, but on this slide, but you need to remember that on the y-axis of this graph or table, I is irrigation, and we have 3 levels, and N is nitrogen fertilization, we have 2 levels. So we can predict these levels independently or separately. We can predict them as a group, so we don't care the level. We just want if it is the nitrogen treatment, if it is the irrigation label, or if it is both of them, nitrogen and irrigation label. And lastly, we can also predict interaction between them, which is the most complex task. So that means every combination of a nitrogen level and the irrigation level. And the numbers in the tables are the percentage of pixels out of the total number of pixels in that plot that have been correctly labeled or classified. I don't know how much the audience is knowledgeable on classification algorithms, but it's important here to remember that unsupervised classification means that there is no interaction with human, meaning that when I perform this task, I don't give almost any information to the algorithm. So the algorithm works itself based on the data that are provided, like the image, the multispectral data. That's the only information that I give. Supervised classifications, which is the rest, they need some sort of training. They need some sort of information from the human, so from the person who is operating the algorithm, such as measured nitrogen or measured water content. And deep learning is something in between, because the deep learning algorithm has a capacity to actually, over time, as it runs, to start to self-learn. But it will always start with the training data, and over time it will self-learn. So it's taken as a more computationally advanced. And we can see that the red color means low accuracy, the blue color means high accuracy. We were very pleased to see this kind of a pattern where you can see that the unsupervised classification performed quite poorly. And as you go towards algorithm complexity, especially towards the UNet, the performance was considerably increased, actually. This is also quite novel results for us. My master student from the institute where I myself did my master's thesis, I was his supervisor. He is now preparing this study to get it submitted. But I think this study shows that it's about time the deep learning algorithms such as the UNet to be more applied in the context of innovation or in the context of industry in the agriculture, because at the moment it's not applied at all. So I'm not sure what the agricultural sector is waiting for. This is among the last studies. All the previous studies I have showed, they used the reflectance. That means that the radiance which is reflected by the target only because of the properties of the target. But I mentioned at the beginning that the radiance can also be reflected because of the change in temperature. And that's called emission of energy. It's still a radiance, but it's emitted radiance. It's not reflected radiance. For plants, why that happens? You know, plants, when they have a lot of water available, their stomata are open, so plants are very bad in utilizing water. Most of the water, they use it to cool down, and very little they use for their metabolic purposes. But if the plant gets stressed by abiotic stress, such as drought, so there is no water uptake, if it decreases, then the stomata will close. It's a defense mechanism in order to save water, no? When the stomata are closed, the temperature is increasing of the canopy. The photosynthesis is certainly reduced, and also the temperature is increasing. The photosynthesis, why it is reduced? Because the same stomata are used for both carbon uptake from the atmosphere, but also water dissipation to the atmosphere. So the plant is actually not that, it's very interesting organism because it uses the same organ to exchange two very different elements, carbon and nitrogen and water. Their metabolism is very different. We can use this information when there is a drought stress, the canopy temperature is increasing. We can use a thermal camera to detect this temperature and to estimate the water status of the plant. I will not go into much detail of this. The study has been published. I was also involved as a supervisor in this study. It's our PhD student, Vita, who has graduated. But the basic principle is about determining four limits where the canopy is either full, but it's either with a lack of water or with full water. And the other extreme is there is no canopy, so it's a bare soil, which is either dry or it's fully saturated with water. If we manage to calculate based on meteorological data and also some ground data, these 4 points, it's actually quite straightforward to use the surface, the canopy temperature in order to calculate the water status. When I say water status, I mean this evapotranspiration. I don't know how much are familiar of you with the concept of evapotranspiration. It's just the amount of water that is, the plant is leaving in the cooling processes. But even with this approach, we also saw a very big accuracy in using the thermal images from the UAV, from the drone, in estimating the amount of water that the plant uses at that moment when the image was taken. Here you can see that this is an interesting depiction from the 31st of May, where as the tractor that has been irrigating has left quite a high values of evapotranspiration. That means that there is a lot of moisture here available for the plant to use it. And here the tractor stayed. So this line is actually not irrigated. And especially this last part, which the tractor didn't, or the irrigation machine didn't irrigate, you can see that it's severely water stressed and evapotranspiration is basically close to zero. This is, I think, let me see if I can run this one. It's just a video of what the thermal camera is recording. Okay, my screen got blocked now. A moment, please. So where we see dark colors, that means that there is a lot of moisture available there. These are experimental treatments. Where we see light colors like yellow, that means that the temperature is above 40 degrees. This is a potato field. So we can see that the thermal camera, which is showing the emitted radiance, is very useful in depicting the water status of the land cover. The point is how to use this information more from an agricultural perspective, and that's why we need to calculate evapotranspiration, because that's the irrigation. The last study, before we conclude, it took a bit longer than envisaged. We also used thermal image, so it also focused on depicting water status on a UAV and on a satellite scale. But now we don't use. I forgot to mention on the previous case study that this water deficit index is a physically based approach. So when we investigate the water status using remote sensing, we use a physically based approach. And that's the same case in this study. It's an energy balance model. Energy balance is a physically based approach. We don't have case studies where we have used machine learning or deep learning for water status. So you see, that's something that we can do in future. Very briefly, just to show that we have some input that this energy balance model requires, and all of this input can be obtained from remote sensing or from weather data. You give this information to the model. It gives you as an output transpiration or evapotranspiration. We have measured both of them, transpiration and evapotranspiration. You can see it here with the subflow. Those that are agronomists in the audience, they know what the subflow means. It's just an equipment to be able to measure the water that has been passing through the stem of a plant. This is a potato. You can see it looks very bad because it's drought stressed. And we have compared the estimates with the energy balance using either the drone remote sensing data or the Sentinel remote sensing data. And we see a very good fit between what is estimated by the drone. Whereas for the satellite, it was Sentinel-2 with 3 combination. There is still a room for improvement, especially when it comes to the low values of evapotranspiration. And this study has also been published. You're welcome to take a look. This is just a summary of how all the previous studies actually we could use to map not only the evapotranspiration in the first graph, but also the first studies that I showed, studies 2 and 3, the biomass production. And if we divide these two, we can calculate the water use efficiency. So that means how much biomass is produced per kilo of water applied. And also we can calculate the irrigation requirement. So how much water is needed to satisfy the potential biomass production. This is very, very useful. And this is probably the first time we can design from an innovation aspect a deficit irrigation at a UAV scale. Deficit irrigation is one of the simplest and most important technologies for balancing crop production with water use. So that means to apply less water than what farmers typically apply, because then you can save water, but more importantly, you don't lose any production. And this approach is actually giving an opportunity for this deficit irrigation. So now this is the slide that I mentioned in the beginning. I think we can maybe enrich it with a few more thoughts or food for thought. From the basic research perspective, maybe we can use also remote sensing to study more on a basic level competition between different species in relation to how they use water, how their nitrogen status is, because now we are able to detect these things. We can also maybe use the thermal data to see how the nighttime metabolism of the plants are doing, because plants will also radiate some energy during their nighttime. And maybe stress tolerance and recovery, it stays. Maybe also some root growth and resource use efficiency, but for this, we need to maybe link it with process-based models. From applied research, I think we are still missing how remote sensing can be used to study reactive flows, so the leaching and greenhouse gases. You could see that none of the studies that I have shown actually showed link between remote sensing and reactive losses. But maybe we can do that if we couple remote sensing with the process-based models. But studies which are linking, not lining, linking remote sensing with process-based models are lacking. There are very few, and there are several ongoing efforts in Europe, but I think the potential is still unexplored. I think I'm towards the conclusion and end now. So apparently, remote sensing for research and innovation is or can be very useful. What do I mean with this can be? Well, again, the local context is of the biggest importance. And on this concluding slide, I put the 3 geographical regions, let's call it in the aligning project. So we have Denmark, we have Greece, and we have our partners in Southeast Asia, in Bangladesh and Cambodia, where the capacity building is actually happening. From the previous case studies, you probably maybe understood that crops are important. In Denmark, there are many crops, but actually it's mostly grasslands and tuberous crops, such as potato, beet, and radish, because these are the crops which are suited for these climatic conditions. Also, in Denmark, the groundwater is shallow. It's very prone to nitrate pollution. So nitrogen is very important. Also in Denmark, because it's in the higher northern latitudes, the sky is typically obscured throughout most of the year with clouds, even in the summer. So maybe satellite imagery on a high frequency is not a good choice. Also, the air is quite humid. So the spectrum, which is very sensitive to humidity, such as the shortwave infrared, it's not much of a use. And there is already an existing capacity provided by the EU through the Copernicus program. There is some national capacity through the Farmers Association, and there are some education related to remote sensing at the universities at a bachelor and at a master level. So when we put remote sensing in the local context, there is a lot of research and innovation potential on what I showed previously, the 7 case studies: crop production, and nitrogen management. In Greece, this is from my personal experience. I don't know if there are colleagues which are from Greece. The situation is different. There are many crops, but Greece also has a lot of forests and a lot of bare land. Greece is also an arid and semi-arid region with a lot of exposed land, a lot of rocks, which means that the land is prone to either fires or to erosion or to both. Greece, compared to Denmark, has a lot of clear skies because it's towards the equator. So all of the sensors can be used. The humidity is low because it's generally semi-arid, so all the spectrum can be used. There is already a existing level of capacity in relation to the Greece is also part of the EU, so there is the Copernicus program. And they have a national capacity because the government already invested in relation to forest fires detections. And they also have some programs related to remote sensing at a bachelor and a master level. So in Greece, there is a lot of research and innovation on soil erosion mapping, and especially on wildfire detection and early warning, because wildfires in Greece have been shown to have devastating effects. And due to the erosion, so due to the even more bare land exposed, the radiative forcing is even increasing, and the wildfires frequency is even increasing, also because of the global change or the climate change, let's call it. So if you map the local context, it will guide you, in my opinion, in which way remote sensing can be used as a research and innovation and education, if you're asking me. Because there is no need, at least it's not a primary need for the students in Greece, how to use remote sensing for grassland management if they don't have a lot of grasslands. Or in Denmark, students to learn the remote sensing for a wildfire management if there is no wildfires in Denmark, because there are no wildfires. So in this last box, I put Cambodia and Bangladesh, but with questions, because I can answer these questions, but I'm quite sure that they will be probably at least 50% wrong, because I don't know much about Cambodia and Bangladesh. And that's, to be more explicit with you, can be quite problematic in capacity building project when the site which is offering the capacity building believes that they know about the destination where the capacity building is happening. There are also some papers about this published, as I mentioned. So it is very important in a capacity building project's expectations to be aligned, and especially the site where the capacity building is happening to take more ownership of the capacity building activity, especially in relation to the local context. I think I will stop here and we'll make a small break with a food for thought about these questions. After this meeting, I will also provide now actually a link because we need a bit of an input, like who attended the lecture. And after the break, we will try to answer this question, how it is seen from your perspective. I have prepared a very simple online document. It doesn't need to be a complicated document because we just need some sort of answer to these questions. I think I'll say big thanks to everyone that attended. And if there are some questions, you are very welcome to let me know now, also by email, also throughout the entire duration of the project and after. Thank you very much.
Salam, you want to ask something?
Hi, Naren. Yes, exactly. You want to ask first or just I move?
Yes, please, Professor.
Okay. Yeah, Kiril, very fantastic presentations you actually gave. It's the remote sensing. It's a technology, but you know that it requires huge, like not only the capacity building, but initially, if we look at particularly at in the agriculture, it requires like the initial huge technological investment, and then countries like Cambodia and Bangladesh, they might not be at that stage like the Europe, where the remote sensing and or little bit of like the satellite technologies can be used. But what do you think that in an economy like Bangladesh or in Cambodia and context, that how those technologies actually can be used, and then of course in the potential sense of like the technology potentiality is very high, particularly in Bangladesh. I would say that as because like the remote sensing, like collecting information or acquiring information without having physical contact, that might be more appropriate because of the country Bangladesh is, the land is scarce. But in terms of the technology or the technological investment, it's huge. So what do you think? It's not only to Bangladesh, but also to Cambodia, at least in my understanding. So I want to hear your comment on that particular direction. Thank you, Kiril. Thank you, Nared.
Thanks as well from here, Alan, and I hope more questions will pour this way or another. Just a reminder, please answer the the survey that I just sent. It's a very short, like 1 minute. Alan, this is quite interesting, and it is what I meant when I mentioned considering the local context. The good side about remote sensing is that so you need data, remotely sensed data, and you need algorithms to be applied on this data. One of the biggest activities that requires costs in research and innovation and in industry is actually acquiring the data. But the good thing is that the satellite missions are providing mostly free data for research and innovation purposes. So when it comes to enhancing capacity for remote sensing as a science and as a technology, I think it's in a very, very good position, because the first component that draws a lot of funding or a lot of resources, like for data acquisition, is already can already be breached, but only on a satellite scale. Which leaves, that means that we can use the existing satellite missions, which have their websites, such as the Copernicus program, the Landsat. There are many others which are providing us already the data at a certain conditions, of course, meaning certain parts of the spectrum, certain spatial resolution, and so on. Which means that it's only the application and the development of the algorithms that needs to be developed or perfected. This is the way how I see it as a startup. Otherwise, you are fully right. If we are to deploy even deeper remote sensing, deploying airborne missions, such as acquiring data from a UAV or at a field scale, it will require resources. The costs are not that high though, but of course they need to be considered. And in that regard, I also want to emphasize, which I not mentioned previously, like any activity, also remote sensing, even for research purposes, it has to fit within the local or the national laws and regulations. That means that if we are to deploy drone or field sensors, they need to be, legally approved and everything. So the way how I see it, yes, yeah.
Yeah, Kiril, yeah, I know that this technology in terms of like the evaluation, it's not new. Like 20 years before, when I was doing my master, I was reading some GIS and sort of like the remote sensing though I am agricultural economist, but I was found like this is very interesting. And then I don't see that much of the progress, particularly in these countries like Bangladesh or Cambodia, or similar nature of country. What you said, of course, and then you also agreed, but in terms of like, once you have the data, you can use different algorithm to get the get you decision, right? But before that, it needs huge sort of like the, though in the European perspective or the Western perspective, it's not, might not be huge amount of investment, but particularly in the countries like ours, huge. And that's why maybe this is one of the issues that why I don't see that highly potential technology, but its scaling, if we look at, it's not that huge.
Yeah. So maybe I actually rushed even a step further, like developing the algorithmic part because the data is available. What I meant by that, I meant education of people, Alam, meaning how would we expect people to start playing with the data and with the technology if they don't have an educational kick off, let's say. And on this slide, I hope you can see my screen. I just shared before the meeting. Yes, just before the meeting, I searched at the University of Copenhagen the courses which contain the words remote sensing. It didn't come up with thousands of courses, and it doesn't need to be thousands of courses, but it came up with 13 courses only at this university. But even from other universities, people can take it, which are remote sensing based. At the bachelor level, much fewer, which means that maybe there is no, and this is quite interesting observation from a university perspective, meaning that there is not much of a need to tackle remote sensing as a basic science, which I don't agree, but let it be. But there are so many courses at the master level, and this reflects the current situation, not only in Denmark, but generally in Western Europe, of a very big demand of the industry for labor, for educated people, maybe not necessarily PhD, but especially master degree. So suddenly you have a lot of courses, so 10 out of 13 are tackling remote sensing on a master degree. And these degrees are preparing workers for the industry, So when I mentioned like increasing the capacity, I meant designing courses and programs which will tackle this need. Of course, there will be not much happening in Cambodia, in Bangladesh, if there are no courses about it, if people don't learn about it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Kiril.
Is there other question? Narat, what do you think? It was actually, I think we can take it a mixture of formal and informal. It was actually your idea about the topic because I wanted to present more the fundamentals of capacity building, but I hope this was also quite useful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kiril. To me, I think it's pretty technical because um, as NGM, we are not the agricultural university. However, I think it's good to apply this, but it would cost much. Do you have any data that I mean, to compare with the cost and benefit analysis of using this? I mean, the cost of production when the people use it. The farmer use it, they will have a high return in production.
This is a good question, and thanks, Narat. And I never thought actually about it. Maybe because in Denmark, the application of remote sensing is still on a simple level, mostly for biomass production management. It's integrated not at an individual farmer level, but it's integrated within the farmers' associations. And there is like one big farmer association, and this association is actually providing the services or the advices for the farmers using remote sensing. So basically, the costs are integrated in this association, and also this association is supported by the government. There is no discussion about it. So from a Danish perspective, the cost benefit is integrated and it's probably quite beneficial. But again, having in mind that it's kept on a quite a simple level. In other countries, how we can justify from a cost-benefit analysis, I don't know the answer of that question, and it's something that we should hold to and make it relevant, meaning farmers would be, of course, always interested in solutions or in advices which involve remote sensing, also if it makes, of course, a financial sense to them. So it's something that we should bear on mind. I think this is something that we also don't include very often, even in the education, because if you take a look on the courses that I have showed, they are more from what you call technical part. So you know how to actually use the data, the algorithmic part, the computation, and so on. But there is not much of actually how to match the cost benefit with the application of this technology. This is maybe more food for thought, and yeah, I'll keep it on mind because I think it's quite relevant, especially in the context of Southeast Asia.
Yes, Kiril, because when we when we disseminate something that we result from the project to our farmer, we need to convince them that our result or our technology really good for them, and convince them that if they use it or if they apply what we touch them, we will benefit for them. So because farmer they are business in business field, so they need to know whether the new way of farming is good for them. I mean, that can benefit, can give them profit. So it's really important to know about the financial aspects.
Definitely. And please have in mind what I mentioned earlier. One of the good positions of remote sensing, at least on a satellite scale, is that data are available on a satellite scale. So it's much about the design and the innovation in the algorithmic part. And also, like in the rest of the world, in Cambodia, I mean, there is internet available at some level, and there are computers available at some level. So there are preconditions to start investigating how it's not about how good remote sensing is. There is no discussion about that eventually in Cambodia and in Bangladesh, like in the rest of the world, everywhere, the farming will get more digital, what we call, with more involvement of remote sensing. The point is what you say, to make it more feasible. And for that, we need to start investigating. And we can't investigate if we don't have anything to start with. As far as I know, maybe some of the colleagues can say something. There are no courses on this. There are not many companies in Cambodia or in Bangladesh that are using remote sensing for agricultural management and so on. So if there are, let us get them on board in our innovative clusters. If they are not, I think this is an excellent opportunity to start. Are there other questions? I'm quite sure there are maybe some students who are maybe having a thought on this or. Okay, otherwise, I suggest we make 15 minutes break here. At least I need, a break. And after the break, we will not spend a long time. It's 30th of December. I acknowledge that. So I am very much thankful to everyone who joined the event. We will spend just a few more minutes in order to answer some of the questions about the application of remote sensing technology in relation to research and innovation in Cambodia and in Bangladesh in a local context. When I say local context, you can take it literally local in your own environment or maybe regional or national. How to put it in a higher relevance. So let's take a 15 minutes break and then I'll share a small link to make this like more digital and to help us also benefit more on the project. So we'll be back at 11:35 in Denmark. That's like plus 6 hours in Cambodia. And plus 5 hours in Bangladesh. So in 15 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much, Kiril.
Thanks as
Thank
well,
you,
yes.
Professor Lam.
I'll also stop the recording.